Hello everybody, Raven Knight here, and welcome back to another round of For Honor lore tidbits, where I share with you guys some lore that I have created for the world of For Honor that kind of helps out in fleshing out the world and helping to write legends a little bit. Now, I've been going through all the factions, and I'll be honest, the Knight, Samurai, and Vikings, pretty easy. I didn't have too much trouble coming up with lore tidbits for them. The Wulin was a lot more difficult because I had to be a lot more creative. The Outlanders are kind of a mix. Some of them, I had no problem coming up with lore for them. Others, they made it a little bit tricky. But what we're going to do today is we're going to go through each one of the Outlanders, and I'm going to give you one tidbit of lore that I've added for each one of them. So let's not waste any time, let's get right into it. Starting with Pirate. So the original pirates, I believe, were actually the remnants from an island off of China known as Canton. The people there had a strained relationship with China, and with China reeling from the civil wars for succession and power, the people on Canton had to be more self-sufficient. But with the island's limited resources, the people there had to learn to fend for themselves, which led to piracy growing rampant. This led to the island sort of turning into a pirate haven, but Bo Yin came along and rallied the various pirate captains and leaders under her banner and formed a large federation of pirate fleets, and with her at the head of it. In this way, it leads to the idea of why so many pirates look Cantonese, why so many follow Bo Yin, why it was so important that she joined Horkos or Chimera, and in the end, she kind of joined Horkos and then kind of didn't. It's a little complicated. But there could be other pirates outside of her fleet, which would explain why we have Captain Coalheart, who is not Cantonese but is still a pirate. It just means that he wasn't from Canton and wasn't part of that pirate federation. But that would explain where most of the original pirates came from. Medjay. Despite the Medjay's devotion to their Egyptian lands, many of them saw the resources and opportunities of Heathmore and remained, partly in defiance of Nefrika and instead with the intention of starting new lives and perhaps a new kingdom in this more fertile land. In fact, many of the Medjay likely see a stark weakness in Nefrika. I brought this up in my Timwa lore, and if you guys want to hear that story, it's one of my favorite legends that I wrote, the Legend of Timwa. Really fun to write. But in the Legend of Timwa, I revealed that Nefrika knows about the power of the Scare Bracelet and knows it could potentially save Egypt, but he refuses to do it. The reason he refuses to do it is twofold. Number one, because he believes that it's a power that mortals shouldn't use and only the gods should use it. And two, he doesn't want to rely on supernatural relics and elements to heal a kingdom that deserves to be healed through hard work and sacrifice. But there are going to be a lot of Medjay who don't agree with him with this and say, nah man, we live in a dust bowl. We live in a rundown desert city that we are the only ones left in. We should be using that power to fix it. He possesses a powerful relic, the Scare Bracelet, which should have restored Egypt to its former glory, but instead he hides it and pretends it doesn't exist out of fear of it. So for them, this is a weakness, not a devotion, and the Medjay are not united any longer. Now, in the story of Timwa, I added that Nefrika had a sister who he is madly in love with, and Nefrika doesn't want to use a Scare Bracelet to heal her because he's worried that she may gain health back and then rise to power because people may like her more. So that's a little something I added on that portion, but like I said, I'm only doing one tidbit for this, so I thought that I'd kind of compile them all into one kind of thing, if you know what I'm saying. So that is Medjay. Afeera. The Afeera resent Heba. For those of you who don't know, Heba is the leader of the Afeera, and when they came to Heathmore to get revenge on Ravier, Heba confronted Ravier in a one-on-one fight. They fought, she broke Ravier's mask, and she saw her face. The sight made Heba feel sympathy for Ravier, and she hesitated, letting Ravier escape. I believe that many of the Afeera feel resentment and frustration with Heba. To many of them, they should have gone to Heathmore, killed Ravier, fixed their sphere, and returned home. Unlike the Medjay, who are from a rundown, broken relic of a kingdom, according to the lore, the lands of Arabia where the Afeera come from is doing great. It's been doing great for hundreds of years. While Heathmore's been locked in constant war, the Afeera have been doing fantastic for themselves. They have no interest in Heathmore, and with their Sultana dead, a new Sultan or Sultana must be appointed. They need to get home and start fixing their kingdom. But with Ravier now on the loose, their mission remains, and now many are angry and frustrated that they have to stay in a land of war, which is a land they didn't want to be a part of in the first place. So I think a lot of them have a lot of hatred towards Heba right now, and she's probably mad at herself. Ocelotl. I don't think the Ocelotl is quite as peaceful as they make themselves out to be. The lore tells us that they gave up the human sacrifice aspect of their culture, a major misstep by the way, but it doesn't quite add up for me. If most of their neighboring tribes were destroyed and they lived in a state of perpetual harmony because they didn't have to war with them, why do they still have warriors? See, little side tangent here, but this is one of the problems I've seen with the Afeera and Ocelotl lore. If the lore writers of For Honor want us to think that the Arabian Peninsula and the Mesoamerican indigenous empires, historically warfaring empires, were now living in peace and prosperity with no problems before Horkos got involved, then why do they still have highly skilled and capable warriors able to hold their own and defeat experienced and battle-hardened veterans? You cannot, on the one hand, say our people live peaceful lives due to how prosperous and awesome their societies are, and then on the other hand say, but their warriors are some of the best and most elite fighters who make even the bestest Horkos leaders look weak in comparison. Either they are a warrior society who are trained and honed in the art of war, or they are not. So my theory lies in this. Here's how I fix this. The Ocelotl are a bunch of liars. They weren't the only survivors of the Cataclysm, and they didn't just pick up the pieces left behind by their neighbors. They raided what was left of their neighbors, and they put them to the sword and broke them, and kept their warriors around in the off chance any other survivors tried to show up and reclaim the spoils. The reason they stopped sacrificing people was not because, the gods were punishing us, but more because they knew that they were out of offerings. The fact is, with all the other tribes mostly defeated or capitulated, they can't afford to keep sacrificing people all the time anymore. They have to be playing a lot more carefully now and not do that as frequently. That's my tidbit about the Ocelots. Hatun. All right, brace yourself for this one. I don't think the entire Mongol force is involved in the invasion of Heathmore. In fact, I'd argue their invasion isn't even going as well as they'd hoped. Here's the reality of it all. Ready? The Hatuns invaded in a fast and powerful way that took all of Heathmore by surprise. But it wasn't a crushing and unquestioned victory. The reason it shocked everyone was because of the nature of their initial attack. Afeera rounded up the bulk of Horkos to meet with General Medjay. And that meant that when the Hatuns struck and crushed the Horkos forces at that meeting, then the back of Horkos was broken, freeing a lot of Heathmore from the yoke of their control. But it did not mean that Gul'jin and her Hatuns would fill the power gap so easily. Furthermore, Heathmore has not been and will never be one unified force. Even Horkos knew they couldn't do that. The Vikings, knights, and samurai all fight differently, have different cultural beliefs, and approach war vastly differently. The Hatuns lack resources and manpower to truly cripple all three factions at the same time. And even if they manage to pool their resources and overcome one faction, it only gives the other two factions time to regain strength. Gul'jin is likely up to her ears in stagnation. That's why she's holding Colosseum matches to execute enemies and entertain her people, to bolster morale and hide the reality that her invasion, though starting off very well, is now slowing down and doesn't look like it's going to pick up again. Virtuosa. Some of you may already know this from my legend video about my own Virtuosa character, but I'll restate it here. I think that the Virtuosa may be trained by Ilaria, but Ilaria doesn't actually have any interest or investment in their progression or status as warriors. Here's the reality. Ilaria is a cocky, arrogant, and hypocritical woman. She resents the knights as all backwards and self-righteous fools who kill people and overlook those in need, but at the same time flaunts herself, steals from former allies out of spite, has never done anything notably altruistic with her skill or time, and partook in piracy at the expense of others with no evidence of remorse or a desire for penance. So in a word, she's a narcissist. As such, she doesn't train other Virtuosa because she believes in them, but because she wants an audience. She wants praise and admiration, and who better than a bunch of disciples and pupils who hang on her every word, follow her every sword stroke, and get instruction from her on how to be more like her. Imitation is the greatest form of flattery, right? At least that's the way it goes. So eventually, many Virtuosa probably break off from Ilaria's tutelage because they wise up to her true nature and decide to stick it on their own. The Virtuosa are not a unified group. They're not their own tight-knit community. They're a bunch of women who came to Ilaria because they thought that she would take time to truly improve them and make them better and allow them to stand on their own, and she did, but once they realized that Ilaria was more obsessed with them praising her skill, they moved on from it and became their own things. That's why you don't see a lot of Virtuosa forming their own packs or groups. They're more women of fortune rather than they are an actual army. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, all I have for the lore tidbits of the factions. But does that mean I'm done with my lore tidbits altogether? Absolutely not. I have more lore that I'd like to share with you guys, more tidbits that I've created. For example, I want to talk a little bit about the politics of Heathmore, like how I think that their societies and politics are structured. And I also want to tie in some more historical stuff. I also want to tie a few loose ends and see where I can come with them. But that is all I have time for today. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.